My father had always worn a taweej. A taweej is a cylindrical Islamic talisman you usually wear around your neck, seemingly to offer protection. The funny thing about this was, however, the fact that we were all ardent Roman Catholics who went to church every Sunday and knew the Bible like the topography of our nostrils. This antithesis had earned my father a lot of attention, primarily the unsavoury sort, after the sudden burst in this last decade. Honestly, it confused me more than anything to know that my father, who once grounded me for a week for a giggle in church, wore an amulet around his neck that was obviously from another religion, indeed one that was at war with ours pretty much all throughout history. Whilst bemused by this talisman, I didn't care much. After all, my father could wear all the necklaces he wanted, as long as he got me that Burberry trench coat as a birthday present. So I didn't probe, at least until I graduated with a degree, and my father proclaimed that his gift of adulthood for me was a trip to India. Excited? Fucking yes, I was. I'd been the Indian girl for my then 22 years, and it was terribly embarrassing to tell everyone I'd never seen the country I inherited my skin colour and relentless competitive spirit from. My entire family came along. My brothers even took time off from work and postgrad to sit on a crowded plane. Cattle class is the best class, my oldest brother Arjun sang sarcastically. We went to Kerala. Obviously, my parents hated tourist sites and tourist spots, so our first stop was at the village my father spent his later childhood in, a small, red-dusted village a few kilometres off the city of Cochin. Embarrassing to say, this was the first time I'd ever seen my grandfather. I swear this man was absolute gold. I'd never made friends with an old person as friendly and humorous as he was. He told me to call me by his name, which was Chaco Nair. He changed it after his family converted to Catholicism when he was 5 or so, Chaco being an Indianified version of Jacob. He was around 6 feet tall and had the thickest Stalin moustache I'd ever seen, although he was over 80, and would tell the most ribald jokes as he kept a straight face. In a house with my parents who read about 3 books a day, my idiot brothers who went out to check the local temple chicks, and the bloody mongrel that pissed on the lawn as if by clockwork, Chaco was the only person I could talk to freely, and talk we did. He was extremely excited about my life in England, and he enthused volumes over how much he liked the letters I'd scrawled to him as a child. I felt so at ease with him that I went and asked him about Dad's talisman. Chaco, I started. We were sitting outside. It was a hot summer in Kerala, like practically every other day of the year, on the long gabled veranda steps. The house was old-fashioned and feudal, had a courtyard which the dog treated as his own personal toilet, and a long veranda you had to cross to enter the main portion of the house. Chaco, why does Daddy wear that Islamic thing around his neck? He pretended to not hear me. He had a habit of doing that whenever I made rude comments. But today I could sense the stiffening in Chaco's chin and his hands clenched convulsively. You're a curious girl, you know, Deepak. If you were raised here, you wouldn't have dared to ask. Well, I wasn't raised here now, was I? Please tell me, I swear I won't let him know. It isn't letting him know, that's the issue, girl. He patted my knee. Even he doesn't remember most of it, and I'm sure he does not care. My Deepak is lost in his world of chemical equations. I just do not want to destroy your faith in the world. Please, I entreated, and decided to play the pity card. It was, after all, only right after lunchtime, and we wouldn't be disturbed for a long time. Please tell me. Acha-cha? The native word for grandfather cinched the deal, and he looked at me fondly. Promise? You will not think any worse of me? He looked somewhat yearning, and a little lost. He looked so much like Dad that the expression on his face unnerved me. It was as if he had grown very much older in a short span of time. I swear. Do not swear, he frowned at me before beginning. India, in the 1940s, was a mess, dear. Firstly, did you still look as intimidating as you do now? I was probably pushing it, but I'd never known the meaning of the words too personal. You really are your father's child. Never knew another for asking this many irrelevant questions. He sighed then, clearing his throat and rubbing his temples. But it came in useful. I dare say it came in useful. Now I'm translating my grandfather's story from this point on into understandable English. He was always an irritatingly verbose man, even in his letters to 5-year-old me. It was the war at that time. We were forced into a war we didn't care at all about. Our men were stationed in the Japanese-threatened territories in the southeast, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, and we also fought on the European front. What did we care for Hitler? What did we care for Japan? But Britain did, and so, hence, we must. India was broiling with hate in those years. It was a pot that frothed over and was dangerously close to tipping. We hated unanimously, relentlessly and wildly. The Hindus hated the Muslims hated the Hindus, and we Kerala Christians just took the side of whoever had the upper hand at the time. Most of all, we hated the British for our inability to breathe in our own country. And by this point, they had gotten past the stage of ruling with an iron grip and pretended to be our friends. They hated us too, critters in their colony, bugs in their kingdom, but they let us live. This was the atmosphere I had to bring up my son in, my precious 5-year-old, that had questions about every damn ant on the rock. And he was so trusting, so damn trusting. Deepak would run up to the British soldiers as they came riding into the village, and when other kids would shy back home, he'd go up to the men on horses and ask for sweets and toys. That's the sort of child my son was. I was exempted from the war, although I was physically qualified and only 25, because my wife had died in childbirth, and we had no other living relations. So when Deepak was around 5 or 6 years old, my job in the postal office got transferred up north of the state, a Muslim fishing village off the city of Calicut. Deepak was excited to move, of course, to see millions of fish drying in the sun, the whole coast smelling of sea and salt. It's any child's wet dream. We moved into a house overlooking the fishermen's huts, a large, sprawling 2-story house with a courtyard in the middle and 6 bedrooms, although we were only 2 people. The house was, frankly, one of the best houses I had even clapped my eyes on before my son began sending me money from England. There was a path off the front of the house, straight to the ocean, and I'd watch Deepak run across it daily. And since there were fewer British soldiers here, he would accost the fisherman for, "1 fish, please. I just want to see inside it," and sit for long days with the fisher wives. It was truly idyllic to watch the sun sink every night with my son and his school books, to see the glittering waves bathed in red. I was a little upset that the village had no Catholic church, but it would do. I taught my son the Bible and his stories at home, and he would go to school with the village children. We were the happiest we had been for a whole glorious month. It was 2 weeks into the 2nd month of our stay when the odd nights began. I'd put Deepak to bed after about an hour of listening to him clamour for a story about fish and making it up as I went along. So when I crossed the courtyard and retired to my room, I was honestly too knackered to care about anything other than how soon my head could hit the bed. Before I lay down, I noticed the odd smell in the room. Salt. Of course it was a fishing village, I reflected as I wiped my feet down with a rag. It was bound to smell of fish and salt. But this wasn't the sharp, tangy salt used on drying fish that was suddenly pressing heavy on my nostrils. It was the fruity raw salt of the deep sea, a fish that floated belly up, and old seaweed bobbing on frothy waves. My stomach lurched. The smell was somewhat unpleasant, but I put it off to something the stray cats or Deepak had probably dissected in the courtyard. My eyes were fluttering closed, the comforting darkness all around me holding tight as I lapsed off. But then I heard a shuffling, breathy noise. I turned over and closed my eyes, trying to get to sleep. The same breathy noise. A giggle. Gurgling, wet, and it came from the doorway. Feudal Indian houses in those days mainly did not have doors, except for the ornate ones in the entrance. My eyes shot open, wondering if it was Deepak wanting a late drink. No, the doorway was dark and my son was scared of the dark. The laugh ensued again as I climbed out of bed, looking frantically out of the window where the moon shone silkily across the sea, and used the slivery light to look around the room. Nothing. But there was someone laughing, a childlike tinkling laughter. I sat down heavily on the bed, trying to get my bearings and wondering if I should light the oil lamp. The laughter ensued again, and this time closer. My breath caught in my throat. I did not want to offend whatever was laughing at me, but neither did I want it, laughing. Or even there. So I stood up, shivering although it was a humid night, and walked into the bare darkness of the living room. I started reciting the Lord's Prayer feverishly and deliriously as I tried groping on the windowsill for the bottle of oil to light the lamp, when suddenly I felt icy fingers on the small of my bare back. The fingers shoved me, small and wet, freezing yet surprisingly strong, and I slipped to the floor, which was also suddenly covered in a thin layer of salt water. I heard the laugh again, more raucous this time, and the splashing of footsteps in water. When I got up, there was nothing. I continued praying as I crossed the courtyard to check on Deepak, but the boy was still sleeping soundly, his legs thrown across the blanket. His floor was dry. The next night, I told Deepak to tell me immediately if he heard absolutely anything. I made him pray twice, doing so myself, and locked the front doors tightly, barricading it with a chair. More than anything, I detested cleaning up more than I absolutely had to, and last night's deluge of water almost broke my back scrubbing it. I found it hard to sleep. Of course you'd find it hard to sleep if God knows what came and pushed you over in the night and laughed at you for no reason whatsoever. The stress overcame me, however, and I was dropping off to sleep when I heard the sound of whispering. It wasn't from my room today, and hell, that was what terrified me. I could stand a little bit of mockery from the netherworld, and I can clean up water on my floor, but I wanted nothing touching my son. I wanted nothing untoward in my boy's room. So today I lighted the oil lamp and carried it silently across the courtyard to Deepak's room where the whispering came from, and I peeked in through the doorway. My son was sitting up in bed, cross-legged, and he was talking. He was the one talking, and I sighed in relief. Somniloquy I could handle. Ghosts? No. And then I saw Mr. Minahan take out the big shark from the big boat, Deepak was babbling, and I looked in further to scold him back into sleep. His eyes were white, his pupil rolled all the way upwards as he babbled unceasingly. Then I told him, "Can I have this fish, please?" he continued, as I began shaking, my own fingers freezing as I recognised the smell, the dark, fruity salt of the ocean. But he said he'd wallop me if he caught me on the beach, and then I stole a small prawn and... I looked down, ice trickling down my spine, and the floor was bone dry. All the better, accentuating the set of very wet footprints, leading to my son's bed. "My daddy says I can't eat raw fish. Can you eat raw fish?" Deepak asked and waited for an answer. My fingers were numb as I saw my boy's pale face and rolled up eyes. He looked like a ghost himself. Your daddy never gave you fish at all?" Deepak sounded sad, and I saw the decided wetness at the foot of his bed, in the shape of 2 crossed legs. I admit I screamed. Deepak started, his eyes normal and his face flushed again, as I heard wet, hurried footsteps across the room and towards me. I backed away hurriedly, but I felt the same icy, slimy touch on my stomach this time, and a vicious nip. The damn thing pinched me. I whipped around, and nothing. Only the slap of wet footprints on marble and a carrying laugh. "Daddy," Deepak called sleepily as I hurried to his bed, lifting him out of the way of the wet spot at the foot of it. "I made a friend." "Of course you made a bloody friend," I lamented as I carried him into my room and let him sleep there for the night. I let him sleep in my room for the following week, a pastime which Deepak found increasingly amusing, as his preferred method of falling asleep was seeing how many times he could poke his finger into my ear, and if on some nights I felt another, colder finger poking in my other ear, I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to offend anyone or frighten my son, so a ghostly wet willy I could stand somewhat. I was asleep one night when I heard the laughter again, and my eyes immediately shot open, adjusting weakly to the dark. I looked down the side of the bed to see if the floor was wet again, and saw a sudden shape flit from under the bed. I closed my eyes again, and groped a hand out for Deepak. I felt that he was sitting up. 1, 2, 3, he began counting softly, and I swear I almost died right then. Deepak was almost an orphan right then, because the sight of your only son with pure white eyes, pale and hands loosely over his face counting up, was enough to send me into near hysterics. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 18, 20. He jumbled up his numbers and moved away from his hand, smiling. "Are you ready, Saleem? I'm coming." He scrambled out of my bed and began racing around the room, looking under the drawers and calling, "No cheating and going outside and no flying," into the courtyard, checking the windowsill. All of this with rolled eyes, and I just lay there watching him, terrified. In the end, he crawled under the bed, literally right under me, and began whispering softly. I raised the pillow from around my ears, hey, I never professed to be the bravest, and gave his little voice a listen. "Saleem, how come you only play at night?" Deepak was asking. "It's so funny to see Daddy sleeping when we play." Funny. It was funny for him. "Where are you from?" he continued. I'd mentioned Deepak had an affinity toward probing questions, hadn't I? "Are you from Marca, where they sleep when we're awake?" "Really?" As loose as my bowels were, and as sweaty as I was from fear, I could just imagine my son under the bed, nodding seriously at this entity. "Oh, what's Naraka?" Naraka, in Malayalam, meant hell. Any modicum of humour that the situation had previously contained deserted me as I rose up in bed, my eyes wide, breathing harshly. We were Catholics, but my son was only 5 and I had never told him about hell. I didn't want to scare the boy into submission. I wanted him to love God. But here, there was an entity under the bed telling my baby it was from hell, and I was sure it would take him. I could not allow that. I yelled out loud, frothy curses as I closed my eyes and jumped off the bed, reaching under it blindly, groping for Deepak. I heard a sobbing noise that wasn't my son, and suddenly something small struck my forehead, a flick of a nail, before the floor was covered with water and splashing footsteps faded off into the courtyard. I was gasping for breath, choking on the water on the floor, when I heard a sudden bang and Deepak began wailing. I pulled him out. "What's wrong, baby?" I checked him all over, sweating even as water covered me. I put him on the bed and he kicked out at me, still crying. "Did it hurt you?" "No," he cried accusingly, pointing his finger at me as he sobbed. You made me hit my head on the bed frame. I swear, I don't understand children sometimes. Deepak. I rubbed the lump he proclaimed was growing on his head, my fingers still trembling. Who were you talking to? Be honest with me. Lying is for bad boys. Saleem, he sniffed. You always make him go away. He's scared of you. Scared of me? I was scared of the damn thing. I didn't understand why it was scared of me. Have you ever seen him? Yes, I see him all the time. You're so odd, Daddy, Deepak complained, sitting up and rubbing his lump himself. He's my age and he's white. White? I imagined a pale, thin, hairless entity strangling my son. Yes, very fair, Deepak noted. And his hair is always wet and brown, and his mouth is a bit scary because his lips are bitten away. He always closes his eyes also. He's so kind. Why is he kind for closing his eyes? He said the fish ate them and he doesn't want to scare me. Deepak smiled up at me. He's a nice boy, Daddy, just very scared of you. I want to play with him, but he's so nervous when you're in the room. Saleem is my best friend. Deepak. He just told you he's from hell. That's a bad, bad place. I tried to reason with the boy, shivering. Please tell him you don't want to play anymore. Now, I'm all for interreligious friendship and unity, but my bloody son's best friend was a ghost, self-proclaimed from hell, named Saleem. I picked him up and carried him to our neighbour's house. He was a single man living in a fisher's hut, and he was glad to let us stay at his place for a couple of days. Deepak was understandably querulous about losing his best friend, but soon took interest in the way Koya, the neighbour we were staying with, packed fish in ice and salted them for drying. I had to know, however, why it was only our house that was infested with a child ghost who wanted to play games. So I confronted Koya as he was getting the fish ready for market the next day. It's an old house, Chaco sir. Koya shook his head. There are bound to be spirits and things. Leave it, sir. They will leave you also. Koya, I sighed patiently. My son plays hide and seek with something from hell. I sat down under the tree and rubbed my temples. What sin? I asked the question that had been haunting me for the past couple of days. What sin could a 5-year-old boy do, Koya? What sin has a child of that age done that he was banished to hell? He must be a psychopath, absolutely evil, and the idea of my Deepak playing with such a... His name was Saleem, Koya told me finally as my voice rose to almost a shriek. His eyes were weathered and dull, but seemed to go a long, long way in. He was a mongrel. A dog? I frowned. No, Chaco, sir. A mongrel boy. Koya sighed and dropped his bucket of salt to sit next to me on the sand. His father was Nasri Azim, the landlord in the village, a good man somewhat, but prideful. He fell in love with a British lady who was staying at his house while her colonel husband was off to war. This was the first war, you know? She was infatuated with him. He was a handsome man in those days, a typical face, swarthy, dark-eyed. They committed sin upon sin in that house, and eventually the lady became with child. Oh, the lengths we went to cover up the fact that the Memsahib was pregnant, but in the end she gave birth to Saleem, who had unmistakably fair skin and light brown hair. That was it. She went off to England with her husband, who never knew a thing, and Nasri was left with a son, and not a word from the love of his life. He locked the boy up in one of the bedrooms and passed him food through the window. He was a smart boy and found a way to unlock the latch. He used to come over to my house, and my father would give him food and maybe something to play with. But he was always bruised. He was always crying, Chaco, sir. He was kept locked up for a reason, but the day his father found out he was getting out, we heard nothing more from him. That's terrible. My voice was hushed. The child was only Deepak's age, my baby boy who cried when a bee stung him. This was unimaginable. But why is he in hell? Even had he passed away, he committed a sin. Koya looked at the sea and pointed. That 5-year-old half-caste boy, small for his age. One night he walked into the sea. No screaming, no flailing. The boy walked into the sea, and the sea took him. That's why he is in hell, sir, if he is. My heart felt leaden and heavy in my chest. He took his life, and now he was to suffer. A 5-year-old. I took Deepak home the very day because it was our house and whatever came with it was not malicious, it seemed. And at night, when I heard Deepak scampering around and laughing, when the smell of the sea air would come in, I'd watch through the window the clouded sea, keep an ear out for the boys. It was the only time I'd questioned my faith. It was the only time I'd considered that all is not right with what I believed. All God had wanted was for us to be good people. I'd sit out there and consider fate while my son played all night long. One night, there was a silent slosh of water in my room as I sat awake, watching the sea roil and tumble, some muted, hesitant breathing, and suddenly, 2 small, icy hands clasped over my eyes. There was a nervous, breathy giggle in my ear. I controlled my breathing. He was frightened of me, and I of him, but what decent parent would show a kid that he despised him? The hands unclasped, and the laughing became airier as the footsteps flashed out of the room, leaving a trail of water and Deepak snorting from the other room. Saleem didn't visit me often, but now that he knew he could, the atmosphere seemed lighter in the house. On some nights, I'd sleep through their playing, and I'd be acutely aware that late in the night when Deepak was tired out, there was something in my bed that was watching me. The indent of 2 crossed legs, and the characteristic sound of someone breathing through their hand. I didn't move. I couldn't bring myself to scream or kick out. One night, however, I heard him for the first time. I was falling asleep when I smelt the characteristic fish and sea odour, but I didn't change my breathing or awaken because by now I was somewhat used to it. I could sense him, creeping closer and closer, a gurgling breath issuing from every step, and he climbed onto the bed with me, like how Deepak often did. "Baba," he called in my ear. I had never heard him before, and I jumped, my breath whistling. He sounded so longing, and I almost put my hand out to touch the empty air, but I hesitated. "I'm not your Baba boy," I murmured, my heart thudding and my eyes on the ceiling. "I know," he said quietly. It was unnerving talking to someone you couldn't see. "Can I, though?" He spoke perfect Malayalam, his words clear and enunciated. "Can you what?" I breathed, the hairs on my knuckles standing up. "Can I call you Baba?" he asked in a hushed whisper. "Please?" I swallowed. This was a boy whose father had driven him to kill himself. If it were me, I'd have been full of hate. I'd want to kill the corresponding father, which was why I was hesitant. This was a boy whose father had doomed him to a life in hell, who should be full of a pit of hatred, of anger and disgust. I couldn't let him transfer that hate to my family. I couldn't let that anger touch us. "Yes," I said, cursing myself for this foolhardy softness. "Of course." "Thank you, Baba," he murmured. "I'm very sorry." And he vanished. When I woke the next morning, both my hands were clasped around something. In my left hand, there was a photograph of a child. I supposed this was the boy Deepak was playing with on a nightly basis, a boy with wide grey eyes and a hesitant smile. Even in the grainy black and white shot, the boy was unmistakably half race. trapped between warring India and England, his honey-coloured skin and light hair and eyes damning him to one of the worst deaths a grown man could imagine, let alone a child. I opened the drawer and put the boy's photograph in. I locked it. In my other hand was a taweej. This is an amulet with Islamic verses written on it. I dropped it on the bed immediately, I'm ashamed to say now. I didn't know why I didn't just heed the fact that it was attached to a necklace and just put it on my son, or why I closed it up in the cupboard. No, I know why. I was prejudiced, you see. I thought it was all right then, because I wasn't prejudiced toward a person, but rather the symbol of an alien religion. I shivered as I handled it, placing it in the cupboard and locking it. That night, as I slept, the room smelt of smoke when my eyes fluttered open. Dirty smoke, as if someone were burning sanitary pads, and there was a furious rattle from the locked drawer next to me. Scratching sounds, long, jagged squeals on the wooden floor, kicks on the drawer. I shut my eyes again, tightly, and prayed that it was just Deepak and Saleem playing. A bang ensued from the other room, and I heard the unmistakable sound of my son crying, sobbing without pause, and I didn't give a damn as to what was trying to pry open the drawer as I threw off the covers and shot across the courtyard into Deepak's room. My son was sitting up in bed, his curly hair messed up and his eyes screwed up, crying. He had never cried when Saleem played with him, so I looked across the room feverishly for the source of the disturbance. There was something crouching on top of his wardrobe. It was elongated and black, long, sooty fingernails and malevolent eyes over inch-long, razor-thin teeth. It made a shrieking, begging sound as it stared at my crying son, and a bang of bone on glass told me that there was another at the window, looking inward. I don't know what came over me, but I began babbling prayers, not the Lord's Prayer, but verses I remembered from childhood, calling out to Mary, to Joseph, to anyone that would listen, because there were creatures in my son's room crawling toward him. His bed began to shake, and the floor under my feet felt as if it were on fire. I was shaking as the thing on the wardrobe crawled down. I still muttered verses upon verses, and it did the trick. The thing shot me a malevolent glare and broke through the window, and it and its compatriots seemed to vanish into thin air. I ran to Deepak. Jinn, he sobbed, trying to draw breath. Jinn, Daddy. My hands shook. Jinn was in Arabic. Possibly Saleem taught him the word. Demons. There were demons in my house, and there I was with a 5-year-old boy not knowing what to do. You must understand my position. This was British India, not the India of today. I couldn't just uproot and move to another neighbourhood. I gathered my shaking son close to me, and I went into my room. It happened every night for 2 weeks. Every night I had to sleep with my son, and the bed would shudder as I kept my eyes shut tight. The screeching would begin in the dark, and the room would fill with dirty smoke. There would be something crouching over us, rattling the drawer. I began to whisper prayers daily, to wear a crucifix, but other than keeping the demons out for that night, it did nothing. They were always back the next day in greater numbers. They were always back the next day, hissing words in tongues, scraping the back of my shoulder where erupted a long red scar. My son cried himself to sleep nightly. Still, I was prideful. Koya, I asked my neighbour after a week had passed and my son was in school. Koya, I've been praying nightly, yet these things come the next night and the next, and there are so damn many. I can't get a transfer till next year. Do you have a taweej? He asks tiredly. No, I lied, my hands clenching convulsively. No, I have a crucifix. It will protect you against your Christian sins, the kurishu, he used the native word for crucifix. But this entire ordeal was our sin. It was a devout Muslim who drove the kid to suicide. The child was Muslim, and it was us, Chaco, sir, it was us Muslims who watched him walk into the sea. It is our sin that caused this, and you cannot protect yourself by being prideful. No, I argued with him, the western wind whipping up the turbulent sea, my hair blowing backward. No, hell is the same. Your hell or my hell. I will not lose my faith. I did not take the cross out. Daily I took him to school and brought him back, tried to infuse normalcy into our fear-filled lives, and I tried to play with him. I read him stories nightly, and when he shivered at night, it was all I could do to place a hand over his eyes and hope that they wouldn't touch him. He asked for Saleem daily, but Saleem did not come. He had left us alone in that husk of a mansion, the two of us against whatever wanted us removed, the two of us alone against whatever loomed over us, crouched under us nightly. There was a night I shot awake accidentally, only to see at least 20 pairs of malevolent eyes and an orchestrated rhythmic scratching as they stared down. I prayed. It was all I could do. But one night, when I woke, it was silent. I smiled as I woke. Perhaps something had given, and life would return to an odd normalcy. My son playing happily with a drowned boy who called me Baba. My son. He wasn't in his bed, nor under it, and I walked around all the rooms calling for him. The house was quiet and dull. There was no salt, there was no smell of smoke nor sea, no laughter, no breathing, except my halting breath. Deepak! I rushed out in only a dhoti, my hair wild. He was in none of the rooms, everything seemed untouched. I knew something had carried him away, and I began screaming his name, almost hysterical. I was 25 years old then, and I had lost the only thing I was living for. I ran down the path, surveyed the trees frantically, and I saw to the west the roiling, burning Black Sea. Sprinting down the path, my feet cut on the pebbles, I could see a darkened shape in the water, moving slowly. I halted on the beach, breathing harshly, and I saw the sleek, curly head of my son walking into the water. His eyes were rolling white, and his face had an illusion of peace on it. He was willingly giving himself to the sea. I was crying then, wildly, running into the ocean, but something threw me back each time I touched the water, something that left welts on my shoulder that have never faded. My son was waist-deep in the ocean that took everything, and all I could do was stand on the beach and cry. "Baba," a small voice behind me. For a wild, delirious second, I thought it was Deepak, but of course it wasn't. Yet it was the first time I'd seen Saleem. He was looking at me, clutching the photograph I had locked in my drawer unknowingly. Small and slight, even when wet, his brown hair was unmistakable, and his skin was pale from drowning. He had no lips. The fish had gnawed right up to his nostrils, showing pearly white teeth and pink gums, and his closed eyes were strangely sunken in. He was clutching the photograph, holding it out in front of him, and in his other hand he held the Taweej, glinting gold. His eyes opened as he looked at me, and they were holes in his face, going a long, long way in. Oh, you would not have believed how heartbreaking it was to see that emaciated, sunken boy holding the photograph of his laughing, curly-haired self. He approached me, and I shot a glance to Deepak. He was up to his shoulders in the sea. "Can I say it one more time?" the boy asks calmly, although his blue fingers shook. "Just once." "Say it," I knew what he wanted to say. "Please." "Thanks, Baba." He smiles through sea-ravaged lips and skips closer through the sand to pinch me in the stomach. He wades, then, through the sea, approaching Deepak, who was up to his chin, and forced the Taweej onto his neck, and held up the photograph. A flash of darkness, a screech, and both boys were gone. I screamed hoarsely and dove into the water. Nothing threw me out this time. In the water, I caught the billowing fabric of a shirt, and I dragged whoever it was up onto the beach, my eyes burning. A wet, gurgling cough. "Daddy!" My boy coughed and spat up water, and I held him, the Taweej glinting around his neck. We never saw or heard Saleem again, and nothing has ever visited us in the night. But I stared out into the ocean that night, still hysterically clutching my son, and I knew that I had doomed the boy who gave my son his life, that by refusing to protect us due to prejudice, I had let hell swallow him from the modicum of peace he had found, and he had still saved us. I don't know if it was because of the Taweej or because the entities recognised Saleem. All I know is that the boy had committed no sin in the eyes of God. It was darkness itself that wanted his innocence, and I had willingly thrown it to them. I moved away from that ocean as soon as I could. It seemed demonic to me, a reflection of what I perceive myself to be. I brought up Deepak as best as I could. It was all I could do, and I taught him to love God and fear no sin, and I never let him take off the Taweej. When he got into Cambridge and moved from here, I made him swear on my life and honour never to take it off. I don't know if it's because it's a protection for him or because it's a symbol of my own guilt. All I can see, even now, everywhere, is the boy with the fish-eaten eyes and lips holding out a photograph of a smiling boy. He wanted Deepak to wear it, so wear it he will. My grandfather ended the story like that, and the sky was a dark red then and my throat tight. It was hard to imagine my sedate, grey-haired father as the young boy who walked into water. Chaco smiled at me. "You're like Deepak too." He patted my knee, just like him. "Too trusting, too curious. Deepak told me about your experiences in England, but it's better to be like that, trusting and open, than prejudiced and blind like I was. It's better to believe than to not." He rose up from the steps then to give my idiot brother Arjun an earful for scaring off the chickens. That was it then. Our holiday continued as usual, Chaco not letting my mother enter the kitchen, and instead cooking up the spiciest dishes I have ever tasted. Or visited boathouses and malls and villages. On our last day in Kerala, however, my family and I went to Kapad Beach. It was the beach where the Portuguese first landed, prompting decades of colonial rule by imperialists, and Dev wanted to experience the history, so he asked us all to come along. While they screamed and ran down into the sea pretending to be naked and scaring off the local girls, I looked west. It was a sea that gave and took life, one that smothered and saved. There was a hand on my shoulder. Dad smiled down at me, his glasses shimmering in the setting.